Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Thursday, April 11th, and we have a jam-packed show for you today. We're going to be starting off with some NFL draft talk. We are officially 2 weeks away from the draft beginning, the day one pick. So we're going to be specifically today just looking at the top 10 and sort of projecting how it's going to go. I wouldn't quite call it a mock draft necessarily, but we're going to be discussing the different options, sort of the consensus surrounding a lot of these top 10 picks. Then we are going to be moving on to some basketball. I'm going to hit on the NBA MVP race and sort of the discussion that's surrounding it. Nikola Jokic is the significant favorite to win it all this year, despite a lot of fans and some people in the media thinking it should be Luka. So we're going to sort of settle all of that. And then we're going to be recapping last night's games in the NBA before finally actually touching on some MLB. I know we've been a little light on the MLB content as the season is picking up and we're getting into crunch time in these other sports, but we will be discussing Jackson Holliday getting called up by the Baltimore Orioles. He made his debut last night. So just sort of talking the Baltimore situation in general and expectations for Holliday. But before we get into everything, just a reminder to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you keep up with us. You can check us out on YouTube and socials as well for some extra content from both myself and my other show hosts here at the GSMC Sports Network. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker throughout the show. That is gsmcspodcast.net. Would be greatly appreciated. Help to make this show as interactive as possible. Anything is greatly appreciated once again. But also for our live viewers, just a reminder to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. And again, try and make this show as interactive as possible. Now, getting into our first segment of the day, I want to touch on some NFL draft as we are 2 weeks until the day one picks. The first round kicks off on April 25th. So we're going to be diving into the top 10 at least for now. We've talked about some quarterback landing spots and that whole conversation. We're going to be continuing to progress through sort of the draft talks as this comes. But as for today, I wanted to really focus in on the top 10. But again, if in our comment section you want to provide some other types of questions you have, be happy to answer anything. But on that note, diving into the top 10, of course, it is the Chicago Bears sitting as the number one overall team in this draft. And it is just about a lock at this point that Caleb Williams is going to be the first overall pick. It's been this way for some time now, and I know that he's not the most popular player necessarily among a lot of fans, but it did always seem like this was going to be the case. We always have that cycle in the media where a lot of people are arguing for maybe the first overall pick isn't going to be the likes of Caleb Williams, this generational prospect. But we have sort of come back full circle, and here is where we are. So not going to spend too much more time on it, and it seems like the draft is going to be starting at the number 2 overall pick, where I believe that the Washington Commanders, it's been reported, for the past month that they are going to be sticking to their guns, holding on to that pick with the second overall, and they're going to be taking a quarterback. The Commanders traded Sam Howell earlier this offseason, leaving just Marcus Mariota, Jeff Driscoll, and Jake Fromm as their quarterback room. Not only are they likely to be taking a quarterback with the second overall pick, but unless you really have faith in Marcus Mariota and his ability to sort of bounce back after a season on the bench in Philadelphia, It seems like their quarterback is going to be the week 1 starter. For a bit there, it was seeming like J.J. McCarthy potentially could be a riser, and he's definitely still risen up draft boards and is going to find himself possibly, maybe even very likely, in the top 10. I don't think that's where Washington is going here. Sounds like Jaden Daniels is going to be the pick. Again, needing a day 1 starter, Jaden Daniels, more league ready, I would say, than Drake May is. So that is where I expect them to go. Speaking of Drake May, I do think that that is the direction the Patriots are going to go at the number 3 overall pick. They do have somebody else in their quarterback room who is more capable of being a starting quarterback week 1. And, I think that Brissett, the past couple years, has been actually more talented than the opportunities he's been given, both in Cleveland. I mean, he got the opportunity for the first half of the year in Cleveland in the 2021 season, but Watson came back, and Brissett, I think at that point, just with Watson being as rusty as he was, missing over a year and a half of the NFL, I think that Brissett was the better quarterback at the time, and I think he was the best quarterback in Washington last season over Sam Howell. So that means that the Patriots can sort of afford to go with a more of a project player at the position, and I see them taking Drake May, who I actually do like as a prospect as well. I think he has the physical tools, the arm strength, the accuracy, the consistency, and some of the mental mistakes is where people come into question about Drake May. And the Patriots offense does have a lot of holes, especially at the wide receiver and offensive line positions, that makes a lot of people also second guess whether or not the Patriots are going to stay at number 3. And that is definitely fair. I wouldn't be shocked if they traded down. But I do also think that the quarterback position is the hardest one to fill. And as long as the Patriots are sold on any one of these prospects, again, I do like Drake May, they should take that and not worry about the rest of the roster, because this is a very deep class in terms of offensive linemen and wide receivers. So they'll be at the top of the draft order in the second round as well, in the third round, where you can still get some value out of those positions deep. I think that the Patriots sort of have to take a swing, though, at the quarterback position and try and fill it here. Again, comes down to whether or not they actually like these prospects. They've brought in the likes of Jaden Daniels and Drake May and J.J. McCarthy in for meetings as of late. But I do believe that they should stick at number 3 and take a shot at the quarterback position. 4 and 5 appear to be potential trade down spots with both the Cardinals and the Chargers. I do like the idea of the Chargers trading down more than I do for the Cardinals. The Chargers have been an organization that has really mismanaged a lot of free agency moves and such over the past few seasons that forced them into financial trouble. We saw them have to part ways with a lot of key pieces from the past few years, this past offseason as a result of that. They bring in Jim Harbaugh, which is obviously the splashy, exciting move from a head coaching standpoint, but I don't think that means they have to go all in with that splash move this offseason, where there's a very good bargain they can get in return. Like I mentioned, I do sort of prefer getting the player over the picks, but for the Chargers, they already have their quarterback locked in for the foreseeable future with Justin Herbert. They have a chance to make a move with Minnesota, where they have multiple first-round picks, both 11 and 23. It's clear that the Vikings want to make a move and try and trade up. The Chargers can still get a receiver weapon likely at the number 11 pick, and again, offensive line as well, if that's the direction they wanted to go in. There's a bunch of talent deep in the first round, and past that, in the first few days of this draft, and I do think that the Chargers can sort of reshuffle their hand a little bit and fill in some very much needed holes, while the Cardinals, yes, could also definitely benefit from adding some extra draft capital as well. But if I'm Arizona this offseason, I do feel like there is some level of, you want to see whether or not Kyler Murray can actually be your franchise quarterback. I know that not very many people are still high on him. I've never necessarily been all that high on him myself, but the Cardinals were enough to the point where they gave him the contract extension, and now they're sitting with this asset that is a little bit viewed as a negative. And he was the number one overall pick a few years ago. He showed some promise early in his career when he had some actual weapons around him, and he had an older Larry Fitzgerald. He had a young Christian Kirk. He had some semblance of a running game. Granted, it was an older version of David Johnson, but he was still there. And I think that, drafting a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr., who is seen to be a generational prospect, Kyler Murray very well might not be the guy, and you're not going to get any value for him as things currently stand. He's going to be coming into next season fully healthy for the first time in a while. Going to be, I think, a key inflection point for his career and the Arizona Cardinals. I would go out and draft Marvin Harrison Jr. and see if you can resolve any of this, because the ceiling was definitely once there with Kyler, but injuries have big time gotten in the way for him, and also the sort of organization of the offense hasn't been tremendous either. Number 6, we have the New York Giants. They've been talked about of the potential of trading up for a quarterback. If not, they could potentially draft a guy with the 6th overall pick as well. But if that's the chance, I expect at least 4 or 5 to end up being J.J. McCarthy with a trade, or maybe even not. I know there are others who also think that the Cardinals could be a team to draft a quarterback as well. I think that's much less likely, but one way or another, I think that the Giants are going to be sitting in a position at the 6th overall pick where the first 4 quarterbacks have already gone off the board. I don't really suggest going up to make a trade to go get a quarterback either. A lot of holes at wide receiver and offensive line, and I've never been the biggest fan of Daniel Jones myself, but also there has been a very severe lack of talent at the receiver position especially, and that's the direction I think the Giants should go with this pick. They've been very heavily attached to Malik Neighbors, and I think that that would be the right decision. As for Daniel Jones, they signed him to this contract extension last offseason. They have this upcoming season as the one last year where he's going to be at that expensive number, but after that they do have an out, and if they want to go in a different direction, they still can. They have also had a very bad offensive line, so really O-line, receiver, both of these are options for them, but I think they go in the wide receiver direction. Malik Neighbors, again, is the one who's been very heavily tied to the Giants, but Rome Odunze is also a terrific talent as well. If he ended up going off the board at number 6, I wouldn't be shocked either necessarily. The Titans are number 7, and they have repeatedly been mocked as taking an offensive tackle. They've made some moves in the past couple off seasons to try and bolster some of the receiver talent in DeAndre Hopkins, and more recently Calvin Ridley. Just went and spent a ton of money on him this past offseason. So they could go in a receiver direction as well, but that offensive line is pretty weak, has definitely aged over the past couple seasons. Saw them bring in a new center this offseason, but on the perimeter with those offensive tackles could definitely use work. So Joe Alt is somebody who has been at the top of these draft projections for pretty much the entire year. There are some other names as well. Olu Fashanu is another big-time name out of Penn State that has spent most of the year in the top 10. We've seen Fuaga be a riser from Oregon State throughout this draft process as well. J.C. Latham is one other name that is probably plays more of the right side during his time at Alabama, so I'm not sure if he would be the first tackle off the board based off of not having experience at least as the blind side guy. But all of them options here for Tennessee as they try and see whether or not they do have anything there with Will Levis, who did show some promise last season in my eyes. Moving on to number 8, we have the Atlanta Falcons, who seem like they're going to have their pick of the first defender in the draft. This isn't the strongest defense class in the world, but also it's a little bit overshadowed by a lot of the talent on the offensive side, where, of course, with all the quarterbacks and receiver options and the offensive line as well, I do think that Atlanta, who definitely is going to need some help on defense, even though they did do a pretty solid job last season. They were 21st in sacks, they were last in pass rush win rate, and they are losing both of their top 2 sack leaders from last season in Calais Campbell and Bud Dupree, who are both currently free agents. So Falcons could potentially look to bring them back, but as things currently stand, not a ton of talent on that front end of the defense. Grady Jarrett was dealing with an injury last year, so maybe we can expect a bounce-back year from him coming up this season, but I absolutely think that they could benefit from adding a big-time defender here. Jared Verse is another name if you aren't high on Dallas Turner, but I think it's going to be Dallas Turner. He is just an elite athlete, shows that aggression on the field as well. Jared Verse was maybe slightly disappointing this year. I don't even know if that's necessarily fair. It was a Florida State defense that was sort of very well dispersed through the group, but Verse just seemed like early in that year, especially when they played against LSU, he was wrecking stuff and has been on the come up the past couple seasons. I believe he was at Albany when he first started his college career and is going to be a first round pick, but I don't think he's going to be the first defender off the board necessarily. At number 9, there is the Chicago Bears, who have to draft somebody to help Caleb Williams in my eyes, because of the way that the Bears' history really, like, I was first going to say Justin Fields, but really just in the history of Chicago, the only franchise to never have a 4,000-yard passer, and they need this to work out. Ryan Poles, especially the general manager, needs to ensure his job by putting Caleb Williams in the best possible situation to succeed, which I think up to this point, it does look great. Went back, I think that in terms of a day one starting roster, this is just as good as any situation we've seen since the beginning of the 2010 season. Cam Newton and the Panthers that he had when he was coming into the league, I believe he was 2011, but that was the last time I think that there was an offense with this much talent for a quarterback that was selected number 1 overall. Definitely an unprecedented situation here in Chicago, considering they have the number 1 pick, not even due to their record, but out of a trade. This number 9 spot is their actual draft pick. Very interesting to see what they're going to do here. Again, like I said, I think it's going to be trying to address the offense and making sure that Caleb Williams can have that level of success. They have DJ Moore under contract for the next couple seasons. They just traded for Keenan Allen, which should be a good addition. But there are sort of some, I wouldn't even call them red flags necessarily, but he's going into his age 32 season. He has a history of injuries, and he's going to be a free agent after this year. Adding somebody for some long-term depth would not hurt them by any means. Rome Odunze, like I said, would be very worthy of a top 10 pick. It's probably going to be Neighbors, the second one off the board, meaning that Adunze could be an option. Brock Bowers you could also throw into this conversation. I think that Cole Kmet is really talented still, and for as much flexibility I think that there is with Bowers in terms of where you actually want to play him, maybe the Bears decide to go with that 2 tight end set, but I feel like that's a little bit less likely here. The offensive line in Chicago has improved over the past couple years, but they could definitely still use an upgrade, and it seems like at this point there's going to be just one that's come off the board. Again, Alt has been the big-time name for the majority of the draft process in the regular season, but now in these months since then, we've had other names that have really shot up the board as well, so definitely options there. And then finally, the Jets at number 10 definitely have a variety of options here. I think they stick with it. They're going to try and push their chips in to make this year count with Aaron Rodgers coming back from injury. To that point, they are probably also going to go in that O-line wide receiver sort of direction. They went out, they brought in Tyron Smith from the Cowboys on a 1-year deal. They went and traded for Morgan Moses from the Ravens, who's on an expiring contract. Maybe they bring in a tackle because also Smith has been very injury prone in recent years. Definitely don't want to be shorthanded there with a quarterback coming off of an Achilles injury, especially at Rodgers' age. But it's that or receiver, which we also saw they were pretty short-staffed in last season as well. But let me know what you guys expect out of the top 10. Again, we will get more into some of the other conversations as the draft approaches, but that is all we have time for on that note today. We are going to be taking our first break, and when we come back on the other end, we will be diving into the NBA and starting with the MVP case for Nikola Jokic. Should he be the heavy favorite that he is? All that and more when we come back from break here.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished talking some top 10 in the upcoming NFL draft, now that is just 2 weeks away. But now we are going to be shifting into some basketball and NBA talk. We do have Kirito in the comment section asking about what sort of position he should be in basketball. What I'll say to that is that I wouldn't put too much stress on the individual positionings. I understand primary ball handler, secondary ball handler, but at this point, we're much less positionless in the game of basketball today, and combo guard is where you want to be at, in my eyes. But now, moving into the NBA here, I wanted to talk about Nikola Jokic and the MVP case surrounding him. The race is obviously dwindling down with the season coming to a close here, and there is a consensus now that it is going to be Nikola Jokic. On DraftKings, there are only 3 players you can even bet on to win the MVP award. It is Jokic, Luka Doncic, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And Jokic is the overwhelming favorite at minus 3,000. And it seems like it is just about a lock that he is going to win his 3rd MVP award in 4 seasons. In terms of the media, the majority of people are leaning towards Jokic being that MVP. It's well deserved. But there are a lot of people that now, and sort of similar, I think, to some degree, as the number 1 overall pick debate that took place in the media, we try and keep things interesting for as long as they possibly can be interesting. And last night you had Kendrick Perkins, I believe it was last night, talking about that it's wrong for the sports books to have Jokic as such heavy favorites and that Luka deserves to be more in the conversation. In my eyes, it is one of those things. It's like, yeah, Luka deserves to be in the conversation, but does he truly deserve to be MVP? And I know, especially on social media, a lot of fans do feel that he should be, and look at the counting stats and say, well, what else is he supposed to do? I think that, I understand that he is a terrific player. He's no doubt a top 5 player. He's going to be the runner-up, likely him or SGA, but he's going to be a likely unanimous first-team All-NBA selection. But I do see holes in the argument as to why Luka should be the MVP. It starts with team success for me, and granted, Luka and the Mavericks have had a very massive bounce-back season this year after missing the playoffs last year. They currently sit as the 5 seed, 150 games, have a chance to potentially add on that a little bit more as well, but at the same time, they are all but locked into that. I think actually last night, let me self-correct on the fly, they are locked into that matchup against the Clippers in the first round. They're a game behind, so possibly they could find a way to steal home court advantage. But we saw last night the Clippers didn't play any of their starters. I wouldn't be surprised if the Mavericks sort of coast in their last 2 games as well, because it would take, I wouldn't say it would take a lot for the Mavericks to overtake the Clippers in this type of a situation, but also it's one of those things where I think that home court advantage can be slightly overblown at times. Now, if the Mavericks want to go for it, all power to them. I wouldn't say it would be the wrong decision necessarily, but again, fact of the matter is, not all that much is going to happen in this next week or so that is going to drastically affect the position of the Mavericks. And again, have to give them credit for the way that they bounced back this season. But team success, 50 wins is probably about, in my eyes, at least the minimum of what you can win. I prefer for the MVP to have home court advantage. I know that can be very subjective at times based off of sort of the strength of conference, where the Bucks are going to have home court advantage in a series and they've actually won less games than the Mavericks. So I've sort of changed my thoughts on that process, but still, I think that it's Jokic for more than just the team success. I do think that the importance of him on the court has never been more significant, really, than it is this year. I mean, maybe if you want to make the argument, his first MVP season, I believe it was his first one, when Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. missed almost the entire season. But Jokic is plus 23.9 points per 100 possessions. That's how much better the Nuggets are with him on the court. That is in the 100th percentile in the NBA. Luka is still very valuable as well, plus 9.1 points per 100 possessions, and you can definitely make the argument that Jokic is on a better team, but I think it's more than just that. I think that Jokic really elevates all the players around him, and Luka does as well. and there's sort of this toxic narrative that can surround him based off of some of the usage stuff with Luka. People try and point to the situations of Jalen Brunson, or even much smaller. Kristaps Porzingis is another one that's been thrown out as far as the more star power type players, but also with even Grant Williams, who was really struggling on the Mavericks this year, has sort of rebounded some since being traded to Charlotte earlier this year. I do think that Luka makes his teammates better. It is definitely a, ISO-centric offense between him and Kyrie. They take turns a lot of the time, but I think that the others are involved, whether it be Daniel Gafford playing that sort of role position. He was running the break last night and was an important piece for them as well. I liked the positives with that. A lot of the wings that they throw in there, whoever it may be, whether it's Derek Jones or Dante Exum or Josh Green, they can be involved as well. So Luka does do a good job of involving his teammates, but they're just not quite as dominant as the way that the Nuggets are when Jokic is in. And in those non-Jokic minutes, they showed some flashes last night, early in that fourth quarter, to be able to sort of hold off the Timberwolves based off of the performance of some of these younger players. But I also, not that this is a massive case for MVP either, but the way that Jokic has the Nuggets have built this system around Jokic, I think does really help the development of some of these younger players, where you have to always be moving and expecting the pass, and you oftentimes get it. That's why we see Christian Brown and Peyton Watson on these backdoor cuts be able to get open looks at the rim. Sort of stems from the Jokic to Aaron Gordon connection that they've developed over these couple years. And especially in the past couple weeks, I know that Jamal Murray's been back some I think he played his third consecutive game last night. Maybe it was his fourth, actually. But they were still able to sort of stay afloat without Jamal Murray in those games without him. And that's just because that's when Jokic sort of put his foot down and started being the aggressor. We know that Jokic wants to be a little bit more of a facilitator first, but he can be the go-to dominant scorer when he wants to be. And this argument that Gilbert Arenas put out last week, talking about statistically Jokic is the worst MVP that we've seen in the past 40 years, is just a ludicrous statement. He was talking about the fact that, he won these MVPs, but he didn't average a triple-double when Russell Westbrook won MVP. It was so significant because of the fact that it was this triple-double season that we've never seen before, when I think that the triple-double is one of the more overrated, stats in the NBA. And that being said, Jokic as a center, keep in mind, was 0.2 assists per game last year from averaging a triple-double. And he's just such a dominant force, as we saw last night against the Timberwolves during their game. He just operates the show for it, where Minnesota was in that game the majority of the way through. And then, like I said, the Nuggets were able to sort of stay afloat in those non-Jokic minutes. But once he came back in, granted, like those young names I just mentioned, Peyton Watson especially, but him and Christian Brown really started getting it going, then, who was giving them those outlet passes? It was Jokic, but that's when the Nuggets were really able to take it to another level and sort of do away with the Timberwolves. In that case, the Timberwolves, the number 2 team in the Western Conference, that was a big-time matchup, as much as Jokic downplayed it when he spoke to the media. Anthony Edwards said it was a massive game and that he was aware of that. It really was to some degree, and the Nuggets really weren't even honing in necessarily on trying to win that number 1 seed until it just sort of developed for them that it was very possible, and they've taken advantage, and it's been because of the play of Jokic during this stretch of the final season or so. And, you know, that same final month of the season last year is really what put Jokic out of MVP contention last season. Now, based off of sort of the media narratives of Joel Embiid and surrounding his MVP argument, maybe that it didn't even matter with Jokic and the Nuggets last year, but they weren't trying down the stretch of the season, and that's really what doomed him. This year, he actually is still engaged through the full 82, and this is a full season award, and the Mavericks, who will talk more about their performance from last night and in this recent stretch, we'll talk about that more in the next segment, but they are 16-2 in their last 18 games. That's incredible. If this pace were something that we saw for the majority of the year, then would definitely be more inclined to do that. But Luka's effort defensively, I remember last night on ESPN, I believe it was their halftime show or it was pregame, something along those lines, Kendrick Perkins started giving Luka credit for playing defense. And Richard Jefferson was just sort of looking at him like, we're giving him this much credit because he's actually trying on defense now. And Perk was like, well, we haven't seen that from Luka in the past. And Richard Jefferson was sort of like, that's the point. It's a full year award. It's not just who's playing the best down the final stretch of the season. Luka has never really been an effort player on the defensive end. And not that Jokic is this elite defensive presence, but he never gets exposed necessarily. You would think maybe early on in his career, he was pulled out onto the perimeter a little bit more, but in this era of sort of hunting mismatches, I don't think that Jokic gets regularly exposed. And I'm not even saying that Luka necessarily gets exposed. I just also don't think he puts in the effort necessarily that would be needed to elevate his game, and his statistics are incredible this season. There's no denying that, but I just feel like it is a full season award. It's really difficult to try and justify that just because of his counting stats are as good as they are. This team that's been a little bit of a roller coaster this season. Jokic maybe doesn't score as many points per game, but he is as impactful as anybody in the league. He is the best player in the league in my eyes, on the best team in the NBA. I know that regular season wins wise, the Celtics are the number one team, but the Nuggets are the best team in my opinion, and Jokic is, again, the one that leads that race. Team's 24 points per 100 possessions better with him on the court than off. He is the most valuable player in the NBA in my eyes. But let me know what you guys think about the race in the comment section. Again, I know that Luka is a very popular pick for a lot of fans of the game. Let me hear your reasons why, because I do want to hear them. I'm not saying it's this foregone. I mean, in the eyes of the media, it is a foregone conclusion that it's going to be Jokic. I understand Luka deserves to be in the conversation, but what gives him the edge over Jokic? I want to hear your arguments for that. But we are now going to be taking our second break, and when we come back on the other side, we'll be diving into Luka and the Mavericks game from last night over the Miami Heat, as well as the remainder of the games that took place last night. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking some MVP debate between Nikola Jokic and Luka Doncic. I guess I didn't even really get into SGA, who, again, the same sort of conversation about, yeah, he deserves to be talked about, but I don't think that he really does have the edge over Jokic. So if that's the direction you want to go in as well, again, let me know in the comment section what your arguments are. But I want to dive into the NBA action from last night, as again, we have some of these playoff positionings really shaping up, starting with the Mavericks here, as we just talked about them in depth a bit, at least in the last segment with Luka. Last night they faced off against the Miami Heat and came out on top in this one thanks to a big-time first half from both Luka and Kyrie. Their offense was just dominant in this one and really got themselves out ahead of the game for Miami, gained as much as a 25-point lead, which for this Miami offense that we've seen has definitely been struggling this season, was just not enough to overcome as the game moved on here. And the like I said, Luka and Kyrie were incredible in this one. Daniel Gafford also played really meaningful minutes as well when he's hitting these hook shots and this crazy basket under the layup where he was falling backwards and got it to go. Very difficult to stop the Mavericks the way they're rolling. Gafford, by the way, on another one of these streaks of not missing a shot to rival Wilt Chamberlain. He went 6 of 6 last night. Believe he's up to 27 or something consecutive makes. Somebody, if you would like, can fact check me exactly in the comment section. But again, having another one of those runs, which is really incredible there. Miami's offense in this game just continues to look very pedestrian. And in the first half, if you look at this one, Tyler Hero and Caleb Martin were the only ones in double digits. Were really the only ones that showed up. But even that, I mean, you look at the final box score and Caleb Martin was very quiet in the second half. Tyler Hero wasn't his most efficient self. He was doing essentially what he could in this type of a situation. But this was also a very brutal game for Bam Adebayo, who about a month or so I gave out all NBA selections and I said Bam was definitely rivaling for one of those final spots, but he has not done himself very many favors based off of his offensive production as of late. He had a really tough game against Philadelphia a couple weeks ago, this one as well, and I just don't know how far defense is going to get you, and not even the, over-the-top defense statistical numbers. We know that Bam can cover 1 through 5 for the most part, be a very impactful player on that side of the ball, but that sort of reputation can only get you so far. And what is a pretty competitive All-NBA class this year, I'm sure in the next week or so, probably once we have the final game conclude, I will be doing a segment handing out All-NBA selections. But this is a situation with a Miami Heat team that they're just sort of uninspired right now, and that's in large part due to the fact that the Heat have never really cared all too much about the regular season. But Jimmy Butler, again, I never want to sort of dump on him because we know what sort of levels he can bring his game up to when the moments call for it, but just very, very not... He's very passive right now in a lot of these games and doesn't take the level of aggression that we've seen from him in times. And in this game, he only took 8 shots, the least amount of shots by anybody in his team, in his starting lineup. Kevin Love had more shot attempts as well. And Miami did try and make this an interesting game. based off of the third quarter where Dallas's offense went cold. They were just sort of chucking up threes. They ended up shooting 44 in this game. Kevin Love and Tyler Hero were the main catalysts of this run from Miami. They got it within 10, as little as 8, and still Jimmy Butler was just sort of nowhere to be found as an aggressor. And it's not like he was, facing these heavy double teams, at least from what I saw, that was forcing him to pass out of it. I just didn't think that he really looked like he was engaged enough on that offensive side of the ball, and he's still a very good player, obviously, and one that I wouldn't want to face in the playoffs. But if you're putting a lot of stock into this Miami team, you do have to be worried about the level of aggression from Butler, and the regular season is wrapping up here. We will see him likely take it to another level once the playoffs come around, but the Heat have had a chance for the past couple of weeks to sort of sneak out of that play-in threshold, and they just haven't been quite as effective as you would have wanted them to be, where they're now sitting as the 8th seed in the East, and they're probably going to have to go on the road in that 7-8 matchup against Philadelphia, who is no slouch necessarily either. And if they lose that, I mean, it should be the Sixers and the Heat that make the playoffs out of the East. But again, the Heat are just putting themselves in a very risky situation with the way that they've been playing lately. What I will give them is the fact that Tyler Hero has been putting together some pretty impressive performances as of late. And again, that level of shot creation is something that they absolutely need. In his 4 games since returning from injury after missing over a month, he's averaging 23 points per game on 49-35 shooting splits. So that's definitely a positive. They've been without Terry Rozier for these past few games. We'll see how they sort of balance that, because those are their main 2 initiators right now. Obviously, Jimmy Butler can be, but he just hasn't been for a stretch here. But again, Miami, they're a scary team, but also if they flame out very quickly, it shouldn't be a massive surprise. Like we sort of alluded to with the Mavericks in the last segment, they are 16-2 in their last 18 games. Their chemistry seems to be at an all-time high during this Luka Doncic era, where it seems like he's the happiest he has ever been. A lot of people question the Kyrie trade last offseason, or last trade deadline, I should say, including myself, giving up first-round draft capital for somebody who has been lacking a real sense of buy-in. And I know that a lot of fans are saying, oh, well, Kyrie's always been this player. We know he's always been this level of a player, but was he actually going to be bought in on the situation? They were not a good team last year when they traded for him. And I mean, we saw a stretch. I don't have the actual numbers in front of me, so I don't want to get too in depth with it and, look stupid, but I forget exactly what number of games it was. It was something like 10, maybe 15 games consecutively that Kyrie played, which was the first time he did that since 2017. Again, this is a statistic I've seen in a couple places that I'm just sort of trying to recall off the top of my head, but is just sort of a, smaller example of the fact that Kyrie has always sort of seen this level of attitude that has maybe not translated to a winning culture, and now he seems to be back in. There was a report on the broadcast last night that he sort of took accountability for some of the stuff last season, that he wasn't really ready to help defer more, and now he is bought in. Him and Luka seem to have a really nice connection there. That, like I talked about, he trusts Kyrie, but he trusts these other players as well. Daniel Gafford as the pick and roll threat. Derek Lively, who's missed the past few games, but he's a nice piece for them as well, that him and Kyrie are seeming to bring along. And they're going to play the Clippers now. It has been locked in. That will be their first round matchup. Some baggage there, as they have had that Luka versus Clippers rivalry. The Clippers have come out on top in both of those matchups. the playoff series that is against Luka's led Mavericks in the past, but Luka himself has been a mismatch problem. Going to be interesting to see how it plays out there. I also wanted to touch on very quickly here on the Bucks versus Magic game, where the Bucks were playing the second night of a back-to-back. This was their first game without Giannis, who of course went down with the calf strain in their game versus Boston the other night, and he's been ruled out for the final regular season games. Chris Middleton missed this one as well, but it was a lot of Bobby Portis in this one, ends up scoring 30 points in this game, and it was Damian Lillard as well, who has really stepped up every time that they haven't had Giannis this season. That does make for an interesting conversation for the Bucks and how they approach the postseason, where last night he puts up 29 points and 9 assists, was really masterful in the second half to close out this game and just help the Bucks cruise to victory. He is averaging 31.9 points per game on 48% from the field, 42% from three in the 7 games he's played without Giannis this season, which is significantly better than not just his scoring output, which is sort of a given, but his efficiency as well, with Giannis playing alongside him. In those Lillard and Giannis games, he is 23.6 points per game on 35% splits. We've seen Lillard at times this year sort of struggle to adjust to playing that second fiddle role after being the main event for his entire career. And maybe the Bucks do consider this as the playoffs begin in a couple weeks. Obviously don't want to do any long-term damage to Giannis. Both the Sixers and the Heat are absolutely tough first-round matchups, so I'm not saying rest Giannis, but if you feel like you can sort of skate by a bit by just riding the likes of Lillard and assuming he sort of has his confidence back headed into the playoffs, it's at least a conversation. Because again, Bucks are all in for a title this season, but you can't harm Giannis long term. Talked about this yesterday, the fact that a lot of fans are pointing to the fact that Kevin Durant dealt with a calf injury during the 2019 playoffs, and he tried to force his way back early, and as a result, we saw him end up tearing his Achilles that kept him out for his entire first season in Brooklyn. Absolutely don't want to see that with Giannis, who does rely very heavily on his athleticism. So I just thought I would throw that out there. Very quickly on the Magic here, it was a pretty disappointing loss for them yet again. They've suffered a couple of these losses where they've trailed by double digits for the majority of their game. This one against a shorthanded Bucks team, did so against the Rockets the other night. I love the way that the Magic have been able to step up this season, and they've been in contention for not just hosting a playoff series, but potentially even being a 2 seed. But it does seem like their offense just isn't at the level that it needs to be in terms of being a true contender. And this season was never about them being true contenders, so I definitely don't want to be anti-Magic here. It's much more encouraging that they were able to have the regular season success this season than sort of waiting another year and saying, oh, well, I like a lot of these pieces, but are they ever going to be able to actually capitalize on it? They've showed a lot of growth this year. That being said, I don't think that they have the legs on offense to really be able to push any of these teams. I wouldn't even say push, to beat a lot of these top tier contenders in the East. I think they can absolutely make a series difficult for anybody in the East, but I think I'm going to be very hard pressed to actually pick them in a series. We'll see where they end up matching up. A couple other rapid fire notes here. We got Trae Young's first game back from injury last night as the Hawks are trying to work their way into the play-in tournament. I mean, they're in the play-in tournament, but actually coming out of that and making the playoffs. Young played just 21 minutes last night, scored 14 points, dished out 11 assists. He was 5 of 5 from the field, which was nice to see the efficiency level. I wouldn't put too much stock into it. They did lose last night to the Hornets, where it was Miles Bridges putting them away with a layup as the game was ending. Got an awesome Brandon Miller game here. We had posters. We had some big-time shots from him. He just does continue to impress, and I'm definitely, not that I was here at the GSMC Sports Network when that draft was happening, but I was definitely Team Scoot over Team Miller at the time, and I was wrong in that case, and it's been a lot of fun to see. Finally, last notes here. The Suns end up winning by 16, so it doesn't look quite as bad as it felt during the moment, but these were the two teams playing one another for the second consecutive night. The Clippers just ran the Suns out of the building the other night. We're up by 33 at half. Suns did make it a little closer down the stretch, but Clippers were able to close it out. The Clippers rested 5 of their top 6 players in their rotation in Harden, George, Leonard, Zubats, and Powell. And last night started Bones Highland, Terrence Mann, that is, Amir Coffey, PJ Tucker, and Miles Plumlee. And last night, the Clippers pushed them all the way to the end. Bones was terrific in this game. That does sort of continue to... it's Mason Plumlee, by the way. I can't believe I just messed that up. But the... Bones was incredible in this game, ends up scoring a career-high 37, 15 of 29 from the field. He is just so shifty, and he does continue to show that he has this scoring ability that hasn't been fully tapped into just yet. Maybe for lack of opportunity, but also a little bit lack of playing in a real team-friendly game. But last night dishes out 9 assists as well. He and BJ Boston as well, also known as Brandon Boston, but they were both really effective. Both scored career highs in this game, and this was a little bit concerning for the Suns. Again, they end up winning, and today doesn't really mean all that much, but they were really struggling for a lot of this game. Grayson Allen has been on a big-time slump for them as of late. They're going to need him to actually step up if they want to have a chance in the postseason. A very top-heavy team. Allen's actually coming off the bench nowadays. Royce O'Neal got the start over him. So, again, Suns can't overreact because they end up winning, but definitely did not seem very promising for a lot of last night. And the Suns, as they head into the postseason here, I definitely don't feel great about them sitting as the 7th seed. So, you know, they can definitely beat the Kings, and they do definitely have sort of the ceiling of reaching their full potential with the scorers of Durant, Booker, and Beal, but it has not looked pretty for them for a lot of this year, and I did not think it did last night either. But we are going to be taking our final break here, and when we come back on the other end, I want to talk some MLB and the debut of Jackson Holliday. So we will be getting into all of that right after this break, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Just finished up our NBA talk for the day. Going to be diving into some MLB. If you're an MLB fan, I'm sorry I haven't been putting out more baseball content just yet. We are very in the works here. Just finished up March Madness, basketball season coming to an end, NFL draft coming up, but going to be talking a lot more baseball as the season progresses here. I want to get into Jackson Holliday making his MLB debut, but also, quick side note that I just noticed as I went into my notes here, the Royals are currently up 9-0 against the Astros in the top of the third inning. This is coming after last night the Royals stomped the Astros 11-2, and assuming they're able to hold on to this game, nice 9-4 start for KC. So for those of you who had Bobby Witt surprising as an MVP candidate, this might be the year here. But obviously, again, just sort of an unrelated note to the current topic at hand that I wanted to briefly talk on. We'll dive more into that, of course, as the season comes. But Jackson Holliday, the number one prospect in all of baseball, drafted by the Baltimore Orioles with the first overall pick in 2022, just a couple days ago was announced that he was going to be called up to the major leagues. Was a conversation headed into the year as to whether or not he should start in the major league. They put him in the minors for what they said was going to be trying to get him to face more left-handed pitchers before being called up and being thrust into sort of although the Orioles still obviously have a very open window for years to come, they are in win now mode, and that's what they're hoping to accomplish during this season after winning 100 games last year, being a very promising team. And again, they said they were hoping to get him more left-handed at bats. Now, there are people who are sort of calling BS on that claim, considering the fact that he's already up here in the majors after only having 11 plate appearances versus left-handed pitchers in the minors so far this season. And he was off to a great start, hitting .333, 482 on base percentage, 595 slugging, had a couple home runs, walked 12 times in 10 games. So there was definitely cause for him to make his debut in the majors, but a lot of people are sort of suspicious of the Orioles to see, well, was it to actually have him on this developmental path, or was it because you were trying to manipulate his service time a little bit when contract negotiations do come with him going forward? But again, one way or another, he has arrived, and it is going to be a lot of fun for him. Of course, the son of Matt Holliday, a many-time All-Star in the 2000s, 2010s. And as for Jackson, last night made his debut. It wasn't necessarily all too tremendous when you look at the statistics. He had 4 at-bats. He struck out twice. He did have his first ever Major League RBI, but I think that it's going to take a little bit of time here. He's batting 9th as things currently stand. I'm sure that the Orioles would love to have him sort of progress into the heart of their lineup, but definitely a long time to come, because as we've seen with the Orioles, they are very reliant on a lot of this young talent. They have Gunnar Henderson hitting at the one Rookie of the Year last year. Adley Rutschman, the runner-up in Rookie of the year prior, just happened to go up against, and with limited time, only came up to the majors about halfway through the season, but going up against Julio Rodriguez. But he has already emerged as a potential MVP candidate, maybe a long shot, but even still. They have Colton Cowser, who's emerged out of just about nowhere. At least, I'm sure the more diehard baseball fans would have been maybe more in tune to him, but he's really come out and shocked, and I don't think that he's going to be standing with Holliday when the AL Rookie of the Year finalists do finally come out at the end of this year. But he is off to an incredible start in his own right, batting .421 and being a significant piece for this Baltimore team. But this was definitely one of the more anticipated MLB debuts in recent history. I know that there was a lot of buzz surrounding Chris Bryant when he made his appearance in the majors, but Jackson Holliday here, I think the fact that He was sort of the consensus number one pick headed into that 2022 draft. He's been so incredible, flying up the majors. He's now here at just 20 years old, I believe he is, not turning 21 until December. So he's going to play out this whole season at just 20. There's a lot to be excited about here. And, you know, there's a lot to be excited about with the Orioles as a whole, where, yes, they spent a lot of the 2010s struggling. I believe 2016 was the last time up until last season that they were actually a real competitive team. And now, because they have developed their farm system so well, they have youth talent everywhere in Holliday, Rutschman, Henderson. They have Grayson Rodriguez out of the rotation as well. So this is an Orioles team that is going to be a lot of fun going forward. Again, maybe some questions about why they chose to sort of manipulate the beginning of the season with him the way that they have, starting him in the minors and waiting until now. But at the same time, the Orioles were a little bit as well. I wouldn't even say underperforming. It's the very beginning of the year, but this is an extremely competitive AL East, and at the time, they were third in the division. Some of these stopgap players that they were hoping were going to be sort of the people that they could stay afloat with up until Holliday makes his debut in the majors, and it was always sort of anticipated that he would find his way into the major league this season. Just weren't really able to hold up to that level, and, you know, things sort of play out to the fact that now he's here. And I think, again, how many times can I say it? It should be a lot of fun to see how Baltimore progresses here. They are in just as good of a, I wouldn't say just as good of a position, but in the American League, I think that they are probably in that top three in terms of expectations behind the Astros and the Yankees in terms of, you know, fully arriving this season. They end up getting swept to the Rangers in the playoffs last year. Rangers are a team that they're not looking to go anywhere. They start out with a nice little start to the season. Not that it's, you know, been anything unheard of. The loss to the Athletics a couple days ago was definitely disappointing, but they have loads of talent. They have more arms coming in their starting rotation as the year progresses, hopefully, at least as long as they can all stay healthy. And they have some hot young prospects as well in Wyatt Langford and Evan Carter, who they're hoping that they can sort of still defend their title their title defense, I should say, the best way possible. But the Orioles are up there with just about every other team in the American League odds-wise. Now, I would probably still bank on the Astros ahead of them. Grayson Rodriguez has been a nice arm for the Orioles, and we've seen him have some flashes, but I do think that fully healthy, I trust the Astros pitching staff more than I do with the Orioles. That being said, they also bring in a Corbin Burnes who has been off to a really impressive start to this season, and I don't know, I just think that it's going to shape into an incredibly fun season. All of these prospects that have come up in recent years have been incredibly fun to watch. You look in the National League, of course, Tatis, I know a few years ago, but Tatis has been a lot of fun to watch. O'Neal Cruz is potentially slated for a comeback player of the year season as well. Julio Rodriguez, as I mentioned as well, and has gone a little bit sort of under talked about after being, you know, really one of the big time faces to the point where he almost got a little bit overrated. But Ellie De La Cruz has all the, you know, talent and skill and things in the world to emerge as one of the best players in the league. Him with Christian Encarnacion Strand as well. So much youth talent in the MLB nowadays that I think that this next generation is absolutely going to be sort of, I wouldn't even say the revival of baseball, but there is still sort of this conversation about it's not as much as the NBA necessarily, but these next faces of the league. It was Mike Trout for a very long time. I know that he's not the most outspoken player necessarily, but still just with performance, and he's also been having quite a little resurgence himself this year. Hopefully he can stay healthy through the entire year, but just so many marketable players going forward, and I just think that the MLB is in a very good place. We talked about the pitching injuries earlier this week. That is sort of the biggest thing that is a concern with the future of the league, but still feel like it is in a great place and think that this season is going to be tons of fun. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Check out our socials, our YouTube channel as well for extra content. But we will be back tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock Eastern, and we will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.